Well, welcome back to Waffle Wisdom. I'm so excited. I've got a good friend of mine here with us today, all the way from Australia, Miss Kate Smith. Kate, how are you doing?
Well, I do have to start off by saying, G'day, mate. How are you? I am great. I am so excited to be here and to have you in my study here in Canberra, Australia. What a way to start a Saturday morning.
Absolutely wonderful. And it is Friday evening here in Indiana, in the United States, when we're recording. And I was telling my students today, I said, I'm going to be talking with someone tonight, tomorrow. Looked at me and they said, What? That doesn't make any sense. And I said, Well, let me explain to you. It's going to be tonight where we are here in Indiana, but it's going to be tomorrow for her in
That's
Australia.
right.
So
Yeah.
fantastic. So, Kate, I just a quick little background here, and then we really kind of want to talk about education. And you're an
Hmm.
award-winning educator and got some really good things to say, I know. But you and I met over 10 years ago now, and I see it there. It is behind you at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center at the Space Camp, International Space Camp, and you
Yeah.
got to be on the same team, and we got to do some neat science experiments together, and I just had a wonderful time, and everyone you came in contact with absolutely fell in love with you. So
Oh, gosh.
so tell us a little bit about just a kind of quick thumbnail about your background in education. So saying you started off as a teacher, you ended up as a principal. Kind of tell us the trajectory of your career.
Okay. Look, thank you. So basically, when I was 5 years old, I fell in love with my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Webb, and that's all I ever wanted to be. So luckily, when I finished year 12 here in Australia, I went to Armidale College of Advanced Education and received my diploma of teaching and started teaching out in Alice Springs in the centre of Australia for the first couple of years of my career and absolutely loved it out there despite the 45-degree Celsius plus days, day after day after day. Moving down to Canberra, I then completed my Bachelor of Education. And just last year, I have retired after 37 years being a teacher and a leader in the ACT Directorate of Education. ACT meaning the Australian Capital Territory, and Canberra is the city within that territory. So I have taught every year level from preschool, which is the 4-year-olds here in Australia, right through to year 10, which are the amazing 16-year-olds. And across that time, I just absolutely loved the joy that I'd receive on a daily basis, the love I was able to just exude with, and the amount of fun. And have had a beautiful career being a teacher, moving into an executive teacher, which in Australia is the next rung up the ladder for a couple of years in a high school. And then I moved into a deputy principal position in a very low socioeconomic school. It was 3 very incredible years that taught me a lot about children with coming from trauma-informed backgrounds and very, very tricky school. Then I was lucky enough to move into a principal's position at a school that was exactly the opposite from a very high socioeconomic area, all here in Canberra. And after 5 years there, I moved into the Directorate of Education, and my role there was a Director of School Improvement. And in Canberra, we're based in 4 towns, and the most southern town of Canberra is called Tuggeranong. So I had 22 principals in 22 very different settings that ended up being my class. So I would teach, learn from them, teach them, guide them, work about everything to do with the nuances of each school. And then I got a little bit jealous that I was helping them in their schools and I wanted my own again. So I then finished my career off being a principal at Palmerston District Primary School for the last 6 years of my career. So I've been there, done that with quite a few different things within the context of Canberra.
Sure.
Very, very lucky lady.
Well, you said several things there. There's two in particular I want to come back to, and I just want to go ahead and mention here on this video. I was so fortunate not only to get to meet you, and of course for you to introduce me to the wonderful Australian invention of Tim Tams, and you introduced me to Vegemite, which many of us in America only know because of the song from
Land down under.
Land Down Under. Yes. would talk about a Vegemite sandwich, but uh,
Yes.
I was so fortunate and blessed to have you write a blurb for my book, and was so honored to have you do that. So just really want to go on video first of all and say thank you for that. I really
Oh,
appreciated that.
gosh, you're
But
so welcome.
I want to go back to you mentioned that it was your kindergarten teacher who really
Mm,
inspired you, and I think so many times upper grade teachers do get the recognition. Students are a little bit older, they then graduate and they immediately remember maybe someone when they were 15, 16, 17 years old. And I don't think those lower grade teachers get enough recognition and
mm.
start us off on the right track. They are so foundational for us. So I think this is so important that it was a kindergarten teacher that inspired you. What did she do? You said Miss Webb was her name. What did she do that really inspired you and put you on that path?
Look, I think if I visit my little 5-year-old self, what I remember most about her is that I just could not wait to get to school. I loved her. It was obvious she loved her class. It was just that feeling, a very strong sense of belonging. And I'd love to go back now and actually just be able to rewind time and look down on the class with me in there as a little 5-year-old. That'd be pretty cool, right? But I think it was just a strong sense of belonging, and she instilled a love of learning. And I think if you get that right at the foundational level for the majority of children, then everything can be built upon that in a very steadfast, secure way where learning becomes a real part of who you are and your being. And that certainly was my story. And not that long ago, we met up again. I was a relief teacher on her class, and we looked at each other and just collapsed. The likelihood of us ever running into each other again was almost zero. But by gosh, we've stayed in contact almost daily since. It's just beautiful.
And there's still another question from what you said initially that I want to come back to, but something you just said. You talked about the love of learning and getting that right at that early age. And you've had such experience in different kinds of schools, different settings. You mentioned
Mm.
different backgrounds of children. And while obviously there would be some differences there, I think there's also got to be some similarities that no matter what the child's background, there are certain things that any child will relate to get that love of learning. So, from your experience, what are some of those key things that would really transcend a particular background that would help that young person develop that love of learning?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's any major mystery, but very much getting to know the child and finding out here as a principal in my schools for the first 3 weeks of the academic year. We start in early February here, as at the start of our academic year. We do nothing but get to know the student for 3 weeks. We spend time understanding how they are out in the playground. We watch, we observe, we join in, we play. We spend time exposing them to the values and concepts that we're wanting to achieve across the year and how that sits with them. We talk with them, we get them to write us little stories like what I wish my teacher would know about me before we even start. And it's just investing that time in forming us. And then at the very end of the year, what I brought into my school was the last 2 years was all about celebrating us. Sorry, the last 2 weeks of the academic year. So the forming us and celebrating us became a very important part of the schools that I was a leader of. And when, as a principal, it's being very, very visible, being out into every classroom, spending a large majority of the week. I'd have parts of my timetable that nothing would be able to penetrate because that was dedicated to being in the classrooms. And when you understand the need, we had a little phrase that we called up like read the need, feed the need. So if we knew that children were coming to school without breakfast, or if we knew that children's might have mum in hospital, just having a baby, or something's happened in the family, because we invested so early in knowing the story of every single child, then we were able to really be able to be responsive to their immediate needs, and the communication lines between home and family, between home and school was really open, very visible, and And I had 860 children in my school. I knew every single one of their names. I knew what they loved and what they were doing on the, not every single one, but what they were doing on weekends because we were out there. And you'd be able to go up into school on the Monday morning and say, hey, how about the Raiders on the weekend? They absolutely whopped the Bulldogs. And then, children's face light up because you invested in their world, not just what they're doing during school hours. Pretty much the most important thing in my heart. When heart and head connects, great things happen.
So here's the point where I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go into another room and I'm going to cry because
Steve.
no, no, seriously, you take, from what you just said, you are taking play seriously. You're taking that
Oh, yeah.
time early on. And I think so often, at least, and it is certainly not true in every school in the United States. I think many of our schools do a good job with that. But I think far too many don't focus on play. They don't see especially in those early years, they don't see the necessity of that, and they focus too quickly, too early on the academic achievement and quite
Mm.
frankly, testing. What role, if any, does any sort of state or standardized testing play in early elementary education there in Australia?
So we have a system that is called NAPLAN, and that's a national assessment tool for students in years 3, 5, 7, and 9. So when that was first introduced, there was, oh gosh, mixed feelings. Private schools where parents would pay a fortune for their children to go to school certainly expected that their child's NAPLAN scores would be incredibly high. And I think I'd be pretty correct in saying that children would get uh, would be taught to the test. At our school and because I'm in a government as a government public school, we have a very large suite of assessment tools. So NAPLAN became a snippet of how that child performed on that one test on that one day, and we would use that as part of our suite of tools to see the full picture of how they're going with the teacher's observations in class and with their weekly or fortnightly individualized spelling assessments. So whilst it's there, it's important, you've got to have it, but it's not the be all and end all. It's just a performance on one day, once a year, every couple of years.
I love that. As you said, it's just one tool in the overall kind of package, and I think that's so important. And I think at the end of the day, I think students fundamentally know this. I think parents
Yeah.
fundamentally know this, and yet too often in too many schools we focus on one particular assessment, and as you say, make it the be all end all. I do want to go
Yeah.
back to something you mentioned earlier. You used a phrase. You said executive teacher, and you said that's the next rung up. Now, that's
Yes.
a term that I'm familiar with here in the United States.
Ah.
What does executive teacher mean? What does that entail?
It means something different in a lot of schools, but you have classroom teachers, and then the first promotional position is executive teacher. Typically, they they harness the one particular part of the school. So it might be that you have a particular skill set in technology, and the principal is wanting to improve the technology use across the school. So you become the leader of that across the school, as well as having year level responsibilities. So you might be the senior school executive teacher, technology. That might be your role. At my school, and particularly after COVID, I found a huge need to really invest in student well-being. And so I brought in two executive teachers for student well-being who offered alternate programs. We had a fair number of students who were avoiders coming back to school with high anxiety after periods of home remote learning. But I was one of the only schools that did that. But we read the need at our school, read the need, feed the need,
Yes.
and we did that with absolutely incredible results. When you're an executive teacher, and this is a little unusual, I think, for American. I remember my buddies over there at breakfast and lunchtime at Space Camp. We don't get to stay in one school for our career. Every 5 years, we have a mobility clause whereby you lift up and you move to another school through a transfer process. So to become an executive teacher, largely you need experience in two schools, maybe even three, where you then prove a leadership capacity and specialisation in one or two areas. And then the next level up is deputy principal and then principal.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we were talking about, and I was reading a lot about, again, about 10 years ago. I haven't seen as much about it in recent years, but the need for some sort of ladder of advancement in
Yeah.
education, which you certainly have in other professions. And one of the things, again, specifically in the United States, it was recognized you're a teacher, and pretty much that's it. If you want anything more,
Ah,
maybe there is a department chair position at the high school level, or again, vice principal, principal, but that's it. And so one of the
ah,
things people were talking about was finding additional ways for teacher advancement, for schools to utilize the expertise and the skill sets of teachers in new ways. And we still have some of that. We have what we call academic coaches, but it doesn't sound quite as formal as what you were talking about there. So let me ask you this: do you find overall, or again in your experience, maybe just specifically in the Canberra area, or more broadly, do you find that there is good and healthy satisfaction among teachers in the profession? Are you finding a lot of turnover? This is one of the things we've been fighting in the
mm,
United States, is really within the first 5 years, so many teachers leave the profession. Uh,
yeah.
so what are you seeing there?
Steve, it's a mixed bag as well. It largely depends on the quality and the investment that the principal will put into coaching a coaching model at the very start of someone's career. We again, and several schools across the ACT that I know of and friendly with principals, would implement a very strong coaching and mentoring process within the school to keep our teachers, robust. It's also interesting too that teachers that I've been lucky enough to mix with in my career, and particularly in my last school, were the most superb group of humans. I have had a staff of 100, and sometimes they would be their own worst enemy as well because they knew that little Steve Perkins really loved Latin. Well, gosh, we've got to get that hook in there. So they would spend time researching and finding the exact thing that they knew would really hook him into a maths lesson or really hooking him into a writing lesson. And so there was an awfully large amount of time that my teachers would invest in work that was important, but nonetheless exhausting.
Mhm.
And so we'd say, look, you don't have to go to that length all the time. It's you. We trust you as a professional. But that burnout word gets bandied a lot around in Australia at the moment. And I think it would be a very fair thing to say that despite having very firm systems and structures within the school to support, to take away the unnecessary so the teachers can focus on being the best teacher they can be, there's all these external factors that come our way now. And particularly, I can say hand on heart, the impact of parents post COVID has had a major impact on the teachers' well-being. Parents generally are rather lovely and, as I quote in your book, rather delicious, but there certainly is a disproportionate amount of parents now that make life a little tricky and can be, rude and abusive to teachers right through to principals, and that's very wearing. So the money here is good in Australia to be a teacher. The beginning teachers earn around $92,000 a year. The conditions are largely great, but if you happen to be in a school where the senior leadership team doesn't believe in a lot of coaching and support and strong systems and structures, and you're then copying it from parents, that's where you see teachers think, well, we don't need to do this. We can get a job in the public service with far less pressure.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and you nailed it right there. And in fact, I was just having this conversation. I feel like it's just a few days ago. In fact, it was a few days ago. I'm remembering now with whom I was having the conversation. Um, we often, at least in the United States, like to attack our political leaders as being the primary cause of the problems in schools. And I've said for years, well, they're part of the problem. But
Mm,
I think the biggest problem is poor building and district and area level leadership. If you have
mm.
got good principals and superintendents and various administrative leadership team, kind of as you were just describing, it can be absolutely fantastic. The support is
Yes,
amazing. And if you have poor leadership at that level, it doesn't matter what else is going on. It's like
yes,
taking friendly fire in war. It feels like you're getting shot by your own side. And
absolutely.
that's what drives people out. One of the things I heard you say back when we first met, and then I think I even maybe reference it in the book, you would use the phrase teaching shoulder to shoulder with
Yeah,
teachers, and the
yeah.
amount of time that you would spend as a principal in the classroom, just getting in there, mixing it up with the children, but also with the teachers. I think we can already guess why that's important to you, but just say a word about that. Why did you maintain that once you became that building level principal?
I think teachers needed to see that I was still invested in the art of teaching, not just creating, policy and the vision for the school and leading the school and all the complexities that come in a community of 1,000 people day after day after day after day. So being in the classrooms, being shoulder to shoulder, seeing what they're seeing, experiencing what they're experiencing. I needed to have that information so that if I could see there were particular problems or particular behaviours, my awareness then was able to then also move into that design phase of being able to support them with bringing in allied health professionals, for example, or suggesting to change the classroom furniture so that children weren't spending too much time turning the backs of their heads around, or that the technology loop was insufficient. So being there shoulder to shoulder literally just meant being in the classroom with them, sometimes co-teaching, but also observing, providing feedback and problem solving with them, not for them, but with them. Everything was with. We did things together. We didn't do things to each other. Everything was a very big with community. Yeah.
I love that so much, and you've referenced the fact, and viewers of my channel know that obviously I teach Latin, and one of the things I talk about with the students, some of the great generals from antiquity, people like Alexander the Great, people like Julius Caesar. These guys fought with their men. They got off their horse. They got down in the trenches, as we say, and fought alongside their men. And as a result, their soldiers loved them to death. They would follow
Mm,
anywhere because they saw these leaders were willing to encounter the same risks, encounter the same hardships, and you really can't lead if you don't know what's going on. How are you going to know what's going on? Like you said, with
exactly.
children's furniture in the classroom. That's a little detail that you can only get by observing if you are
Mm,
actually in that situation.
yes.
So let me
And
ask
I
you.
think I'll,
Yeah.
oh,
Well,
sorry,
please,
Steve.
please,
I was going to
go ahead.
say also, I've been supremely lucky to also work with some of the most incredible deputy principals, and we just saw each other as equals. And there's 40 plus classrooms to visit every week, so you don't get to personally to every single classroom to observe what's going on in a formal lesson situation. So we'd divvy up classes as well, and then we'd come back together when school was over at the end of the day and talk about what we saw, and and then also jump into the brain tank and have a group approach as well as to different things that we could do. So supporting teachers was fundamentally the most important part of our leadership stance.
I was talking with somebody from a university several years ago here in the States who was telling me that the greatest majority of people he saw going into education and administration, he said, let's be honest, he said they weren't the worst teachers. They certainly weren't the best teachers. He said they tended to be
Mm,
middle of the road, fairly average sort of teacher who tended to go into administration for the pay raise. So you
mm,
really had not the best and going into it for not the right reason. Now, I have worked with some phenomenal administrators, both at the department chair level, what we call assistant principal, or you would have deputy principals. I've worked with some phenomenal leaders. But I've also seen the effects of those leaders who maybe got into it for the wrong reason. If there were one thing that you would say to a young teacher, whether in Australia or in the United States, who was saying, you know what, I'm thinking about doing more. I want to go a little bit beyond the classroom. I'm thinking about some sort of leadership position. What would be the one piece of advice you would say to that person so that that person's leadership would be the most effective?
Oh, that's a great question. Look, I'd have to focus it around the word impact. I'd have to say something along the lines and have in fact said, what impact, how do you think you can add value? What impact will you bring to the classrooms down the corridor, to the classrooms, in the school, down the road? Because the impact and the way that you add value has to be, like a little octopus with his tentacles, touching into the homes of children. And if they can answer in a really, I think, a beautiful, simple way of where their heart and their head connects, and they can talk about how they're going to add value, then I'd support them and guide them and mentor them, all the way through, giving them experiences and opportunities to show that leadership within the school, which I've done several times. And it's been my absolute delight to have grown 7 other principals within the ACT system.
Mm.
We're a fairly small system, and many, many deputies, and goodness knows how many executive teachers through that purposeful, fit for purpose little project that we can work out together for them to do. And there is nothing better than sitting back and listening to a teacher, an aspiring executive teacher, come in and tell you of the value that they've added in certain areas. Like it is, oh, it's like it's just the best thing, best feeling.
Well,
So yeah,
obviously,
impact and adding value.
yeah, you take obviously such joy not only from children, but from the teachers and your colleagues,
Oh,
and so forth.
yeah,
And you just used the phrase you mentioned heart and head.
yeah.
And you had the I will go ahead and say this. You had the good fortune to meet my wife when you were here in
I
the United States.
did.
I do think my wife is a far better teacher than I am. She hates it when I say that, but it's absolutely true.
Oh,
But one of the things that Melissa always is saying, she will say, things aren't either or, they're both and. And
yes,
so often that is the case. It's both heart and head. And it is
absolutely.
human nature to try to make things one or the other. And we all tend to tip maybe one way or the other, but trying at least to keep that balance there.
Mm.
So let me ask you this. Now, you said that you retired. Obviously, you are way too energetic, way too vibrant a human being, just to sit around and do nothing. And I do get to see some wonderful pictures of your family and other things on social media. So, what are you doing these days? And are you doing anything regarding education now that you're in retirement?
Look, I'm looking at self-education. I'm doing things that I have always wanted to do. I love being a learner. And I remember a quote, I can't remember who said it, but I remember there was a quote that if you're green, you're learning. And once you're ripe, you rot. So I have remembered that my whole life that I'm always wanting to be green. So I have joined the ACT Lapidary Club, and I'm busy learning about all kinds of rocks and semi-precious rocks and chalcidites and agates, and I'm polishing and cutting all these amazing little cabochons. So I'm in a brand new world of learning there, and I've never looked at rocks ever so excitedly before. I'm busy collecting heart-shaped rocks wherever I go, which sounds ridiculous, but it's so much fun. And I'm writing a book called A Palette of a Life, and I'm also painting, learning to do some painting and a relaxing technique called Zen tangling. And I go water running at the Australian Institute of Sport a couple of times a week. And I'm a grandma, and I look after a friend who's in ill health. And my week is full, and I don't know how I ever fitted going into work. It's just my yeah. I'm full. I'm a very very lucky person.
I absolutely love that. And especially just take just one aspect. Take the rocks, the lapidary club.
Yeah,
So different from what you were doing before in terms of educational leadership and mentoring and coaching and all that sort of thing, but it's still part of the overall learning and growing for you. And you've got a friend here, I see.
I do. This is Ferdinand Roscoe Lovestruck Smith.
Ferdinand,
Sorry, he's
Ferdinand
Ferdinand Roscoe.
Roscoe.
Sorry, he's just, yeah.
Absolutely love that. I think that is absolutely
Yes,
key to being a teacher or being in any facet of education is that love of learning, which is what you said started you off, thanks to Miss Webb, your kindergarten teacher. So,
yeah,
Kate, I can't wait to
absolutely.
hear more about that book. We definitely need to have
Yeah.
you back on and have another interview with you as well. But thank you so much for your time. You've been so
Oh,
gracious, and I can't wait for everybody here to hear your words.
thank you, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I've missed your gorgeous face. And I still think so fondly of Melissa taking me to my first ever Walmart experience in America. So, yeah. So,
That was
sending you
great.
all my love as well. And thank you. And carry on doing amazing things.
Well, thank
You're
you so
awesome.
much. Thank
You're
you.
awesome sauce.
Oh, there it is. Well, folks, hopefully you have enjoyed this episode with Kate Smith. It's been such a pleasure talking with her. And as always, folks, have a waffle day.